Hello everybody and welcome to the video notes for Unit 4, Day 2. Today we're continuing our lesson about how are addition and subtraction related, but today we're going to be working with variables. More on that in just a second. Today's video is dedicated to Jesus Flores in 6B. Hi Jesus. Before we get started with the math, let's first look at this word right here. What is a variable? And this is something we're going to be working a lot with in this unit. A variable in math, so a variable is a letter, so like a letter in the alphabet, A, B, C, X, Y, or Z, any of those. A variable is a letter that can replace a number. And next to it, you can just write any examples of any letters you want. Right? A is an example of a variable, B, E, X, Y. Those are all examples of a variable. So here's what we mean by that. Let's read this problem here. It says to draw a tape diagram to represent the following variable expression. I want you to underline this right here where it says variable expression. So variable expression is you're going to see letters, these variables, and you're going to see operations. Operations are like adding, subtracting, dividing. And so we're going to start with x. So instead of a number like 5, instead of drawing out 5 squares, we're just going to draw out a rectangle. And in this rectangle, there's some amount. And we're going to call that x. So in this, there's x squares. And then to these x squares, an x number of squares, we don't know exactly how much, but we're calling it x. We're adding y. So we're going to add y squares. So we're going to draw another box next to it. It doesn't matter exactly how long it is. And we're going to call that y. So we have our x amount, and we're adding it to our y amount. So altogether, our expression is going to be x plus y. And we can't evaluate this any further because we don't know exactly what x is, and we don't know what y is. Because for now, we're just using the letters, the variables, to represent some amount. Now if we do the reverse here, and we look at writing a variable expression for each of these, here we have some amount, that's a, and then being added to this amount, a, is this amount, which we're using the variable b to represent. So this would just be a plus whatever amount b is. And again, we can't figure out right now exactly what this amount is because we don't know how much is in each of these, but we're using the variable to represent the unknown amount. For the last one, we start with j, some amount of j. We add k, whatever this amount is, which we're calling k. And then we add another amount of k. So this whole thing is j plus the k amount plus the k amount. Okay. So it's basically we're doing the exact same thing we did yesterday, but instead of using numbers, now we're using these variables. So what I want you to do now is to give the video a pause and try C and D on the right side on your own, and then resume the video after you've tried it to check your work. So pause and try these. And now you are resuming the video to check your work. We're starting with some amount of the variable s, so s squares. We're going to use a rectangle with s. We're adding some amount t, and then another amount of the variable t. These two should be the same size because they're both t. Write an expression for each of these. Here we have f, and then we're adding some amount h. Here we're starting with the variable x. We're adding the amount y, and then we're adding the amount z. So this right here represents x plus y plus z. Okay. So if you got all those on your own, 3 gold stars for you. And now let's level up. What is an identity? Go ahead and circle this word. That's what we worked with yesterday. Remember, an identity is when the number that you end up with is the same as the number you started with. And we can also do that with variables. So draw a tape diagram, is what it says here, to represent the following variable expression. Let's underline this right here, because this is what we're working with again. Variable expression, that's what this is right here. X, that's how much we're starting with. So we're going to make our rectangle for some amount x. Okay, that's what we start with. And then we're adding some amount y. So let's draw in a rectangle for y. Doesn't really matter how big it is. Okay, so that's x plus y. And then we're going to subtract a y. So we had x, we added a y, and then we're subtracting what we just added. So this is now going to be gone. And the only thing then that we're left with is just this x. So in the end, we just have an x. And it's an identity expression because we end up with what we started with, which was this x right there. Okay. Now that I've done this example, I think you have enough information to be able to answer problems B, C, and D on your own. So, you guessed it, it's that time again. We are going to pause, and I want you to try B, C, and D on your own, and then resume the video to check your work. So let's pause and check. And now you are resuming the video to check your work. Remember, always try it on your own first so you can really learn. And today's secret word is sponge. Like what you use to clean stuff or to soak up water, a sponge. Sponge is the secret word. Okay, draw a tape diagram to represent the following variable expression, s. So we start with s plus the variable t, so some amount that, t, then we're going to subtract t, so we're going to subtract out a t, and we're just left with s. What do you notice about both of these examples above? Well, in this one we started with x, and we ended up with x. This one we started with s, and we ended with s. And in both of these, we are subtracting by the same amount that we added. We added a y, we subtracted a y. We added a t, we subtracted a t. So I can say something like, you add the same amount you subtract. So in both of these, you add the same amount that you subtract, or you subtract the same amount that you add. And in your own words, when is a variable expression an identity? Remember, identity is when you end up with the same thing that you start with. So in terms of variables, it is when you end up with the same variable you started with. Right, so we started with an S. After all this, we ended up with an S. We started with an X, we ended up with an X. That's why those are identities. All right, and with that,
Thank you so much for playing my game.
and 3 gold stars if you got all of this on your own.